The little church stood quietly at the edge of town, its stained glass windows glowing like jewels against the dimming sky. Inside, the evening service had ended, but the fragrance of candle wax and the soft murmur of prayers lingered. The pews were nearly empty now, save for a few worshippers who stayed behind, seeking comfort in the silence. At the very front, near the altar, a small girl knelt. Her dress was plain, her shoes scuffed from too many hand-me-down years, but her hands were folded with a reverence that would have humbled even the proudest saint. She squeezed her eyes shut and whispered words that seemed far too heavy for someone so young. "God," she began, her voice small, almost trembling. "I just want a dad for mommy." Her words echoed softly in the cavernous space, as though the church itself was listening. "She's so tired all the time," the girl continued, rocking slightly as though the prayer needed motion to carry it higher. "She works really hard. Sometimes I hear her crying when she thinks I'm asleep. She smiles at me in the morning, but I know, God. I know she's lonely." The girl sniffled, wiped her nose with the back of her hand, and took a deep breath. "I don't want toys. I don't want anything for me. I just want someone who will make her laugh again, and maybe tuck me in too. Someone who will love us both." Her small shoulders shook as she finished, and she pressed her face into her hands. A few pews back, a man who had been sitting in silence felt his chest tighten. He hadn't meant to overhear. He had come to the church, as he often did, seeking refuge from the noise of the world and the emptiness of his mansion. But the child's prayer was different, pure, unselfish, cutting through the armor he had built around his heart. For the first time in years, Daniel Hartman felt something stir within him. The man sitting in the shadows of the third pew hadn't expected to stay long that evening. Daniel Hartman rarely did. Church, for him, wasn't a place of devotion anymore, it was a place of silence. A pause, a rare pocket of peace from the endless calls, meetings, and responsibilities that weighed down his life. He wore a tailored overcoat, its fine fabric out of place against the worn wooden bench. His hands, strong, disciplined, the hands of a man who had built an empire, were clasped loosely on his lap. He had been staring at the flickering altar candles, letting their steady light settle his restless thoughts. But then he heard her. At first, Daniel thought it was the murmured prayer of a mother. But the voice was too small, too soft, fragile, like the flutter of a bird's wing. He turned his head and saw the little girl kneeling near the altar, her golden brown curls spilling over her shoulders, her hands folded tightly. He listened, and with every word, his composure cracked. A child asking God not for dolls, not for candy, not even for friends, but for a father. For her mother. The weight of her innocence pressed down on him with unexpected force. Daniel had built his life on logic, on contracts, on deals where every gain was calculated. But this prayer was not a transaction. It was raw, unfiltered longing, spoken into the void with faith that someone, somewhere, was listening. When the little girl finally rose, Daniel's gaze followed her. He saw her rush into the arms of a woman standing quietly nearby. The mother, Clara, wore simple clothes, her beauty understated but undeniable, even beneath the lines of exhaustion etched across her face. Her eyes carried a softness that spoke of both strength and weariness, the kind that comes from too many years of carrying burdens alone. She bent to kiss her daughter's hair, smiling though her shoulders seemed heavy. Daniel's throat tightened. He didn't know them, yet something inside him whispered that he had just witnessed the beginning of something meant to change his life. The winter wind bit sharply that afternoon, rattling the bare branches along the street outside the church. Clara held two heavy grocery bags in her arms, their thin handles cutting into her fingers. Her daughter skipped beside her, trying her best to help, but the paper sack in her tiny arms was nearly as big as she was. Clara's smile stayed fixed, more for her daughter's sake than her own, but her pace slowed under the weight of the day. "Careful, sweetheart," Clara murmured, adjusting her grip. That was when a shadow fell across them. "May I?" a deep, steady voice asked. Startled, Clara looked up and saw the man from church, the tall one she'd noticed sitting quietly in the back pews. His coat was immaculate, his posture confident, and something about him immediately set off the instinctive caution she developed as a widow. "Oh, thank you, but we're fine," she replied politely, pulling the bag closer to her side. Before she could refuse again, Her daughter's face lit up. "Mommy, it's the nice man from church," she exclaimed, her voice bright with recognition. Daniel offered the faintest smile, crouching slightly so he wasn't towering over the little girl. "Nice man, huh?" he said gently, extending his hands toward Clara. "At least let me carry one." "No trouble at all." Clara hesitated. She had learned that kindness often came with hidden strings. But something in his eyes, something earnest, almost vulnerable, disarmed her suspicion. Reluctantly, she handed him one of the heavier bags. They walked together, their breath rising in small clouds against the evening air. Conversation came cautiously at first. "You live close?" Daniel asked, his tone careful, respectful. "Just a few blocks," Clara answered, shifting her bag. "We manage," he nodded, not prying further. Yet with every step, Clara noticed how her daughter gravitated toward him, chatting, giggling, pointing out holiday decorations in shop windows. Daniel listened, truly listened, as though the child's words mattered as much as any boardroom deal. By the time they reached Clara's modest apartment building, the air between them felt subtly changed, lighter, warmer, as though fate had stitched an invisible thread. Clara thanked him, her smile cautious but genuine. And Daniel, standing in the cold as they disappeared inside, felt the echo of a little girl's prayer tugging harder at his heart. Spring sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the church in soft hues of ruby and gold. The benches were fuller than usual that Sunday, voices rising in a hymn that swelled and echoed through the vaulted ceiling. But for one little girl kneeling at the front, the music faded into the background. Her small hands were folded just as they had been months before. Her head bowed, her lips moved in quiet sincerity. "God," she whispered, her words as fragile as a butterfly's wing, "thank you for listening to me. Mommy doesn't cry at night anymore. She laughs now, she smiles more, and I have someone who tucks me in, and holds my hand when we cross the street. I have a daddy." Her eyes fluttered open, and she turned slightly, looking at the man sitting just behind her mother. Daniel. He hadn't intended to sit so close at first, hadn't intended to stay so long in their lives. But weeks had turned into months, and somewhere between ice creams, laughter-filled dinners, and long walks beneath the quiet evening sky, he had stopped being a visitor. He had become theirs. Clara felt his hand slip into hers, and for a moment, she closed her eyes against the tide of emotions welling inside her. She had fought so hard to protect her daughter, to guard her own heart from disappointment, from false promises. But Daniel had been different. He hadn't come bearing gifts of wealth or grand declarations. He had come with patience, kindness, and the steady willingness to simply be there. Tears stung her eyes as she glanced at him. "She prayed for you," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel's gaze was fixed on the little girl, who now turned back to kneel once more. His throat tightened, and for the first time in years, he felt his own silent prayer rising, gratitude, humility, and a promise he would keep for the rest of his life. He reached over, clasping Clara's hand firmly, their fingers intertwining as though sealing an unspoken vow. The millionaire who had once lived in silence and shadows now felt the fullness of something money could never buy, family. And in the stillness of that church, under the colored light of the windows, Daniel understood. Sometimes, the most powerful miracles arrive not with thunder or grandeur, but through the simple faith of a child's whispered plea.